Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a career field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion is part 24 of a series focused on Configuration Manager current branch and operating system deployment. Today's session focused specifically on the PXE responder service that was introduced in Config Manager current branch 1806. Here's our agenda for the session. This one should be a pretty quick session, actually, just to talk about what the PXE Responder Service is, why we care about the PXE Responder Service, and then go into some of the requirements, restrictions, see how it works a bit, talk about that, configure this, and validate that it's actually been configured correctly, watch the PXE Responder Service in action. All of that shouldn't take a huge amount of time. It's really a pretty easy service to configure, really valuable as well, service to configure. For config manager environments to do any kind of PXE booting at all. So we'll walk through it that way and hopefully be done fairly quickly. So what is the PXE Responder Service? Really simply, you probably know what the PXE Responder Service is before I even say anything. PXE Responder Service is a service that is native to Config Manager that allows systems to be able to leverage the Config Manager client to achieve a PXE boot. Right? Specifically, the PXE Responder Service delivers PXE services without having any requirement at all for WDS being installed on that same system. PXE Responder Service is part of a distribution point. PXE requires a distribution point, so PXE Responder Service also is part of a distribution point. It's an option there, as you will see. The PXE Responder Service is something that can be delivered from any Config Manager client. So any supported Config Manager client that you want to leverage as a PXE Responder Service, you can do so. Again, the caveat is that system has to be a distribution point as well to be able to configure the PXE Responder on it. So this could be server clients, could be workstation clients. Either one is fine. And for the demos coming up, I'm going to use a Windows 7 client as just an example that it could be any supported client. So why do we care about the PXE Responder Service? We already mentioned it. It is something that is natively part of Config Manager. There are some additional requirements. You do need to make sure that DHCP is out there so the clients can get an IP address while they're PXE booting and so forth. But it does start to reduce the requirement on external dependencies such as Windows Deployment Service, WDS, right? So the more we can build things into the Config Manager client to reduce these dependencies, the better it is. You don't have to worry about setting these other things up. So a good reason why. Another is that the PXE Responder Service 100% supports PXE booting on IPv6 networks, right? You could probably add some more. Why do we care about the PXE Responder Service? Being able to place a number of them out across the network and handle different PXE boot situations could be another interesting one, right? To provide those PXE boot services from workstations, maybe in small offices somewhere, and then have the content of the task sequence come across from standard distribution points, right? A lot of potential discussion points in there, variables in there. So what are the requirements for the PXE Responder Service? Very simple, really. Config Manager 1806 or better. The requirements are similar to standard PXE, meaning in terms of networking, the IP helper in certain situations, and so forth, right? There is nothing specific in terms of boundary group configurations that are required. PXE works the way standard PXE does. It kind of services systems within its same network location, and if it needs to service clients across a network location or so forth, we need to add additional pieces such as the IP helper and so forth. And again, requirements, a supported Config Manager client, whether that be a server or a workstation. So we have those requirements. What are the restrictions? Okay. So the PXE Responder Service can be installed on any distribution point, but if that distribution point already is configured with PXE, and the server that it's configured on is also running DHCP, then the PXE Responder Service is not supported at all, right? If you have a distribution point configured for multicast, then the PXE responder service is not supported at all. And the reason why is multicast requires Windows deployment service, right? So since PXE responder service, by definition, doesn't require Windows deployment service, there's the disconnect there. And then in terms of restrictions, there is a connection limitation. Those connection limitations are not imposed by the PXE responder service. They're imposed by the operating systems on which the PXE responder service is running. So for example, workstations, depending on the OS, will have either a 10 or a 20 simultaneous connection limit. As I say that, I'm scratching my brain to recall if that limit applies to Windows 7. I think it does. Windows 7, I believe, has a 10 connection limit. Don't quote me on that. But Windows 10 has a 20 connection limit, right? So it depends on the OS. Servers have no connection limitations. So it's really up to the hardware and the performance of the server, how many connections it can simultaneously handle. All that said, let's get to the fun part. How does this PXE responder service actually work? Right? And this is a little diagram I tried to put together to illustrate, assuming all of this is kind of in the same subnet, and at least in terms of these clients. So I have a PXE booting client. I have my distribution point either on a workstation or server that's enabled as a PXE responder. And then I have my ConfigMgr infrastructure, site server management point, SQL. Okay. So step one, the PXE boot is going to be initiated. Step two, that PXE responder is going to pick up the PXE boot request. And then step three, check the ConfigMgr database just to make sure that there's no reason this system should not be able to PXE boot, looking at things such as making sure that there's no flag on the device to say, hey, you just recently PXE booted, don't PXE boot again. Also making sure that there's an available task sequence that the device can leverage through that PXE boot and so forth. Check that out. We'll send it back to the PXE responder service, and then ultimately that will be communicated back to the PXE booting client. The PXE boot will either fail, such as in the case of no task sequence, or it will proceed as normal, and Windows PE will be delivered from your PXE responder service, and the PXE booting system will boot successfully with PXE. Okay, pretty simple stuff, really. And so now all of that said, let's go through how do you actually configure this and turn it on in ConfigMgr and then validate that it's been enabled. So let me grab my ConfigMgr site server. This is running version 18.10. And so to configure this, it's really, really easy to do. All I would do is, oops, somehow I got PowerPoint back in the mix. Let's put the site server back up there. There we go. All I would do is navigate to administration, go to my distribution points, and then find whatever distribution point or distribution points that I would want to enable this on. In this case, I'm going to use this Windows 7 machine, which is already configured as a DP. Go to Properties. And so on the Properties tab, you will see a tab for PXE. And so specifically, you just need to enable PXE support for clients. And then you have these three items below. The first one is enable a PXE responder without Windows deployment service, right? Now, if you enable that by itself, then the PXE responder will actually be enabled, but it won't be functional, right? It will be enabled, but you will see in the log over and over and over again, cannot respond to PXE requests, cannot respond to PXE requests, right? In order to allow the PXE responder service to respond to PXE requests, you also have to enable this check mark, which is an interesting one, right? Because without that check mark, PXE responder service installs fine, but it won't do anything. That opens up an interesting possibility. So you might have some PXE responder servers out there that for whatever reason, at whatever period of time, you want to leave them enabled as a PXE responder service, but you do not want them to service requests at the moment. So you could just come turn off that flag and the PXE responder service stays there, but the system temporarily goes dormant until you turn this back on, right? Then you have the option to enable unknown computer support. Again, if you want that, turn it on. It's not a requirement at all, just purely as a desired option if you need it. Once you get done with that, then finish out the page with the options and select OK. And now, as simple as that, the PXE responder service is enabled. But it's not ready for use yet, because in order for the PXE responder service to do its job and provide content, it needs to have the content staged on it. In this case, the content that's needed is the boot image, right? So if I go back into the properties of my PXE responder service, you will see on the content tab that the only content I have is the ConfigMgr client, which is there by default on all distribution points, and my 2 default boot images. So I put those there so that we can access them. The PXE responder service can access them whenever it needs to actually do the PXE boot. Cool. So now that I've done that, how do I validate? Really simple configuration. How do I validate that the PXE responder is actually installed? Well, there's a couple of ways. One, if I go to monitoring and go to system status, and then go to component status, look down to distribution manager, and then, show messages all. I'm going to sort from the past 2 days because I installed mine a little bit ago. And then on the filter tab, I'm going to specifically search for message ID 9500 because that is a status message associated with enabling the PXE distribution point. So that's enabled for me. I can tell that it actually was put out there, so no problem. Another thing I can do on the site server just to validate that it's configuring PXE on the distribution point is look on the distribution manager log. Actually, I have one saved off because that might have rolled by now. Look at the distribution manager log. I'm going to search up from the bottom, and specifically what I'm going to search for is the phrase configure PXE. And if I search up for that, then I'll just see some activity in the log where it knows for my particular distribution point, the 7-1, that it needs to go configure PXE. And it has, right? So I can see that indicator in the distribution manager log. Now, the ultimate in knowing that the PXE responder is turned on, though, is to look at the distribution point itself. So in my case, that's a Windows 7 machine. I'm going to just pull that in right here. There's a couple of places we can look at. So specifically, we can start in services. And whenever the PXE responder installs, it will place a new service on the device called the ConfigMgr PXE responder service right here that we can see is started and installed. So that at least tells us the PXE responder is there. In addition, very quickly, you can look and see logs on the device that will indicate, first of all, it's a distribution point. And then in the DP $log or folder, we can see logs, which we can look at SMSDP prov, which will show configuring the PXE responder service. Here's installed PXE and so forth. You can see that. And then also the fact that SMS PXE is here is an indicator that, in fact, the PXE responder service is installed, right? Okay, so let's remove that from the picture for now. All that said, pretty easy, right? Configure it, validate it's there, easy to do. Now let's go see the PXE responder service in action. So to make sure that everything's set up there, we need to have at least one task sequence targeted to the device. And so under software library, under operating system, I have several task sequences here. The one that I configured specifically for our test is this one. Doesn't really matter the task sequence. It can be completely empty. It's just a matter of having one targeted that the PXE responder will detect is valid and allow the PXE boot to proceed. So I've targeted this to all unknown computers, and I've made sure that it is enabled for PXE, right here, no problem. And so with that in play, then let's pull in a bare metal machine that we will use to test a PXE boot, and then we will put the PXE responder service right next to it. So as soon as I start the bare metal machine, May take a second to connect to it, but as soon as I get connected, we should see the PXE boots underway. You actually see it underway already right here, right? Just takes a second to connect to the machine through Hyper-V, at least in this case. So as soon as that's connected, we may even be past the F12 prompt. We aren't, but that's okay. I'm going to hit Control-Alt-Delete, and we'll just see the whole thing. So it's doing a PXE boot. It's going to recognize that, and now give me the F12. I'm going to press F12, and so I didn't press it in time. Let me do that one more time, and then hopefully I will be able to quickly get in it and press it. So here's the F12 for the network boot. So we're loading files. That's coming down. That's Windows PE. Just like anyone who's PXE booted the machine before will see, or booted even from a boot disk, we'll see we're loading PXE, right? Or loading Windows PE. Well, what we can look at on this side, I'll pause the log while Windows PE is loading and scroll up just a little bit, and specifically to this, which starts the conversation. I have a few of those because I disrupted it a little bit. So we're going to see that we're getting the client ID or getting the ID in order to reply. We are, just like you would expect, going to check and see, is there an SM BIOS match? Is there a MAC address match? And in this case, neither of them match. If we did find a match, we would latch onto that record and then do whatever task sequences were deployed specifically to that machine. In this case, this is an unknown boot, so we will handle that. Again, no valid system records, go on. Here's our boot reply, and we will reply with all the task sequences that are targeted to unknown. We filter out a whole bunch of them that are not valid and finally land on the one that I just created, that I showed you that is. And so we will proceed through and start to do the TFTP download, sending the PXE reply, do the TFTP download, just like you're seeing, and that is our PXE boot, and takes us through the process, right? So everything from this point forward is not really necessarily PXE. It's a matter of just standard booting into Windows PE and then loading the task sequence and so forth, right? So pretty simple stuff that we can easily implement. And so this is a feature that if you are using PXE in your environment, really strongly encourage you to look at it, see what it will do for you. Native to ConfigMgr, and definitely worth the look. So with that, we will wrap up and see you next time.